let's do this. Should we bring some more of those in? Not you necessarily need to look at them. It's not like we're gonna, be okay, we're gonna be talking about. Hi, my name's John Dyer. Everybody know me? Hi. Managing broker here at John Dyer School of Real Estate. This is our all things contract. We go through the contract piece by piece every 2 weeks. And then we finished the contract last week, so this week we're doing just a cursory review, literally introduction to Addenda. Next, in 2 weeks, we do the exclusive right to sell, and then we go back to page to section 1 of the contract and start all over again. I'm on my 3rd time through in like 9 months, so it's a lot more comprehensive when I'm in the contract than these particular documents. We're going to talk about Addenda. My standard introduction, pardon me for who I am. I'm physically incapable of being politically correct. If I could be, I wouldn't be, because I believe it's pure evil. I have a horrible sense of humor. And I have a tendency to like sound like a preacher and make you feel guilty.
Oh.
She's printing some more.
Okay. Thanks.
So here's the deal. I believe you have a fiduciary duty to do perfect paperwork. Not reasonable paperwork, not pretty good paperwork, but perfect paperwork. In every T you cross, every I you dot or don't has potential liability for your client. And your job as a fiduciary is an absolute position of trust when it comes to someone else's money. Well, there's obviously a whole lot of money in regards to a purchase contract and Addenda. I believe you should know all these documents damn near by memory. I take a survey in my classes. My classes, their opinion for the 20 plus years I've been doing this is based on some really basic or embarrassingly silly low criteria. Only 2% of agents are actually qualified to write a purchase contract. To be qualified to write a purchase contract, you should have read it 50 times minimum. If I ask you a question, you should be able to tell me what section and subsection the answer is in. And if there's any recent case law, you should be familiar with it, how it could affect your deal or your contract. 50% of full-time licensed professionals will admit publicly, and some will brag, that they've never actually read the purchase contract. You should not only read their contract and all the addenda, you should almost know them by memory. You should never do anything, say or do anything, or put anything to paper that you're not 100% certain. If you got sued and stood before a judge, you'd go, oh, hell yeah, judge, I did this right. I got proof because I do perfect paperwork. 50% of agents have never read the contract. Only 2% of agents are actually qualified to write it. That's not my opinion. That's my class's opinions. We have a very, very pitifully low level of competency when it comes to our documentation. One of the documents that's not necessarily really understood real well or understood how to apply are our different addenda. I know that because people are writing clauses on Section 8 and Section 8 when they shouldn't, because there's an addenda where I have to check a damn box and then have you sign it, and it's all written for you. It's all written by AAR. Why do you want to create legal language when AAR did it for you? There's a reason why we use standardized forms. Arizona Association of Realtors has some amazing lawyers. And if these things are ever called into question, they'll go to fight for them. I believe you have that in our business, that problem solving is a skill for losers. I believe that everything that goes wrong in a transaction where you're representing a client is your fault, period. Anything goes wrong in a transaction where I'm representing a client is my fault. If I'm doing a deal with someone and their client's psycho, and their client's psychosis affects my client, that's my fault, not theirs, not their agents. You need to practice potentially paranoid, prepared, proactive, preemptive problem prevention. How do you do that? Perfect paperwork. How do you do perfect paperwork? Well, you study, you learn, you read, and you look at them, and hopefully the first time you do these addenda is not the first time you've ever seen them. Some of these may be new to you. We have a new addenda I'm very excited about, because I was having to help people write legal clauses for the last 12, 15 years, and now we have a nice little solar lease, solar assumption addendum, and it's beautiful, and it looks really familiar because about 80% of it is exactly what I've been writing for all these years, only I was doing it, typing it on page, section 8. So, an addendum is literally what it says. It's addendum terms. It's additional terms above and beyond that which is negotiated in contract and counter. An addendum can come with a contract. It would simply be additional terms that wouldn't fit on the contract. For example, if you're that poor sap who has to write all sorts of nonsense on Section 8 and it doesn't fit, an addenda is where you put your spillover because it references the contract and where people sign it. It is often could be pronounced addendum. See the last word dumb? Addendum terms. Because it's on addenda where I see the stuff that makes me go, no way did someone really write that and make it part of a contract transaction. The problem with addenda is, you notice, there ain't no boilerplate. When we do this addendum, I'm talking about the primary addendum to the contract, your first one you got in your hand. When we do this addendum, anything on there is legal language, and 100% of it is written by us. If you're writing legal language, here is the basic rule. John Dyer's basic rule, but it's a pretty good rule across the board. Maximum specificity, minimum keystrokes, and read it over and over till you're absolutely certain a third grader would understand what you intended to write. I'm not the dumbest guy in the room, and on a regular basis, I see things on an addendum that I, with my 40 years in this business, teaching law for 30-something, literally had no clue what the hell they're trying to say. Now, there's a problem with that. Buyers and sellers have already signed them by the time they come to me, which means you have clauses, you have things written in a contract that a 40-year broker can't understand. God help the title company and buyers and sellers, and that's where the devil comes in. You know, one of the devils in our business, we got a lot of demons, but one of the real devils is false assumptions and misunderstandings. That's where brokers get involved, that's where the profanity comes out, and that's where people lose deals and lose money. And if it's because of documentation, the paperwork was not written correctly, the legal language, that's 100% on who? The writerer. Now, quick thing on if you're writing legal clauses, just a quick clause lesson here. You might want to even write this on the addendum. There's 4 pieces to a legal clause. I call it John Dyer's legal clause TIMO, T-I-M-O, timing, intent, method, outcome. When does it have to happen? What's supposed to happen? How's it going to happen? And if it does or doesn't happen, what happens then, which is typically a reference, cancellation, and earnest money. You answer those 4 questions. They're not always in that order, but you're probably going to have a decent clause. Yeah.
I'm sorry, could you repeat?
TIMO, timing, intent, method, and outcome. When, what, how, and what if. What if it goes, what if it doesn't? And remember, the clauses in the hard boilerplate of the contract do not apply to your addenda. So if you're like writing a contingency where the seller has to, seller has to deliver all documents on a recent upgrade that weren't attached to the spuds, and you want to make sure that's done, the seller agrees to it, then you would need to put, in the event seller does not do that, buyer may cancel the contract and earnest money be refunded. Always reference earnest money when you're writing a clause that becomes a contingency on a contract. Remember, if you write a condition, that's something the seller has to do by a particular time. Even your conditions are subject to 7A, the cure period. But it's basically where you add stuff. The most common addenda is close of escrow shall be extended to, supposed to close today, it's closing in a week. That's the most standard one. Don't overcomplicate that. I've seen someone write a paragraph and a half to say close of escrow extended to May 5th. Okay, how about close of escrow shall be extended to May 5th, 2018. Remember to put the year in, because throughout history there's been a lot of May 5ths. There's only been two 2018s, I guess, BC, and oh no, that was a Caesarean calendar. So it's not even on the same time. There's only one, and this is it. Any questions? All right, make sure you clearly state who's creating this. Buyer, seller, landlord, tenant. The contract date, and this is something people misunderstand. The contract date is the date that it became a legal document. It's not the date where the buyer signs it. It's the date where the seller signs it if it's accepted, the buyer signs the counter if it's countered. If you had 9 counters, it would be the one that has the word acceptance next to it where they sign. That's the legal date of the contract. That's very important because our contract has about 17 rolling clocks in it, and all those clocks are tied directly to that magic date.
Yeah.
I had someone argue the contract dates when the buyer signed it. They negotiated for 5 days. I'm like, dude, that means the inspection period's half over, was used up by negotiation. And the light went off in his head. He goes, oh, I guess that makes sense. He says, but it says date right there. It says date everywhere. What's a signature without a date? Ink. Have fun. You know what though? We do have some protection in the modern age should someone forget to date something. And it's digital signatures. Everything has a digital timestamp on the internet somewhere. So at least you have that going for you. But that's something you want to double check when people sign stuff. That's why I like digital signatures, because hopefully you're putting date in there that they need to come back with a date. When you have people to do wet ink, sometimes they forget that. The signature without a date is ink. Okay?
So
all right, that's enough on what?
It's the date of the last counteroffer becomes accepted.
It's the date that the contract became fully executed. So whoever was required, the final acceptance, whether that be on a contract, the seller, or 9 counters later in the buyer, that last signature starts the clause.
I've heard that debated between people, so.
And remember, that date, as far as our calendars, our time frames, our rolling clocks in the contract, that date is always day 0. Start counting the next day. And then, well, I love to make fun of my colleagues, and I was part of it. A bunch of brokers and lawyers and people got in a room and screwed up counting to 3, because now it's 1, 2, 3. I dare you to count to 10 on your fingers, because you'll come up one short, because it's really 10, 11. All right. Any questions on this? This is the thing, when you're writing legal language, and I have a clause writing class, a full 3-hour class on nothing but writing clauses. When you're writing legal language, and it's something you've never done before, it's an area of law you're not terribly comfortable with, I don't care who you work for, that's when you get the broker on the phone. We would much rather review your language. I have people email me stuff in the middle of the night. They say, you know, will you read this for me? I'm like, heck yes, because about half the time, I have to help them edit it. I'd rather you bother me and me edit it than me have to bail out the you know what storm that started because it was misunderstood. And here's one of the most common problems. Make sure what you write on an addenda or any ancillary documents is not in legal conflict with the contract, because that makes the entire contract potentially voidable and very likely invalid. Okay? If you're not 100% sure it's right, if you're not 100% sure you can stand in front of a judge and go, oh yeah, Judge, I write great clauses. Aren't you impressed? Then don't write it until you're sure. And that's what we're here for. Don't hesitate to run it past a broker. Yeah.
What do we do with paperwork traceability? We send an addendum in at like a close of escrow addendum. It says it's going to be extended. And the seller says, no, I'm not going to accept that, and they issue a cure. So we've got an addendum out there that the buyer signed, but the seller is not agreeing to.
That means nothing. An addendum that's not signed by both parties never happened.
It just goes away.
It's rejection. Rejection by inaction.
We don't have to do anything with it.
Not doing anything with it.
Okay.
Except for keeping your file for 5 years. No, for 1 year if it doesn't get accepted. All right. Cool. Check everyone's signature. Make sure that that's the beauty of zip forms. The names flow, but make sure that the name on your ancillary documents, like your addenda, actually is the same as the buyer and seller on page 1 and page 9. Check your dates. Check your boxes. Another common mistake I see on this addenda, it has no boxes checked at the top. Now, I can assume by the fact that the top signature is buyer and the bottom signature seller that it was originated by the buyer, but I'm not allowed to make those assumptions. You have a document that says originated by, you have a question that's not answered. That's a really embarrassing thing for me to kick your document and then have to go back to your client and say, what kind of screwed up? I forgot to check the little box. See at the top? Make sure you check the little box. No, you're not going to lose deals over it. No one's going to sue you, but I'm going to make you correct it because I'm all about perfect paperwork. And I've had to do that. I've had to call in my clients and say, okay, I just made a really dumb mistake. I've had people sign the wrong spot. Just was working too fast. Digital signatures, it's really easy. I had to call them back and say, oh yeah, by the way, we got to do this over because, well, you're not the seller, you're the buyer, and there's kind of a difference there. All right. Cool. Oh, and for everyone here and out there in the beautiful interweb, remember, if you get a document rejected by a broker, which is for the most part going to be me, you're not allowed to be annoyed by that. you're required to be embarrassed. It means you made a mistake. You're not allowed to make mistakes because you're a fiduciary and your mistakes can cost your client money. Absolute position of trust, which means you gotta do it perfect. All right, additional compensation. You must disclose any money you made off of anyone from anywhere. Okay, so if you have a buyer broker, you're getting additional compensation from the buyer. That needs to be disclosed to all parties per RESPA. Remember, you cannot take money directly from anyone, okay? The buyer can't write you a check. All money must be paid to a broker. Sometimes it doesn't have to be paid through title. Sometimes it's paid direct, okay? There are people that have cancellation fees to the buyer. When the buyer cancels, they write us a check. It has to come to the company. But anything you're making outside must be disclosed. And here's the big issue, because obviously it's pretty easy to figure out what you're gonna write, you know, $500 from buyer for whatever. REST prohibits the paying or receiving of any fee, kickback, or thing of value for the referral of any business-related settlement or closing of a federally related mortgage loan, including but not limited to any services related to origination, processing, funding. Federal-related mortgage loan includes such settlement-related businesses as termite inspections, home warranty. RESPA does not prohibit salaries, compensations, or other payments for services actually performed. You can't get kickbacks, you can't get spiffs from lenders, title companies, and I don't know a broker in town that wouldn't fire an agent immediately for taking a kickback from a home inspector. That is legal suicide. Never take money from a person whose job it is to protect your client from you. Because one of the people a home inspector is protecting our client from is us. We missed something. Or maybe we were dishonest and we saw something and didn't point it out. So, and going beyond that, I've gotten a Starbucks gift card from a home warranty professional. I've got several of those through my career. Anytime I get something like that, I send it to my buyer. I send it to my seller. I say, hey, the home warranty company sent me this. And I've gotten those from home inspectors after closing. It wasn't a deal, but it was a thank you for sending them business. I will always send that to the client and say, this was sent to me by the home inspector. I already made my money. You're the one who gave them the business. You deserve this. Enjoy Starbucks. I do it for 2 reasons. It arm's lengths me. It keeps me the heck away from it. And it's a great way to suck up to my clients and make them love me a little more because I give them a Starbucks gift card. It's a win-win.
So
Beware of RESPA, Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act. Yes?
I'm sorry, so when would this actually be used?
Say you have a buyer broker agreement and you're getting additional money above and beyond the co-broke, this is where you would disclose that. Say you have a transaction fee, which some people have for buyers and clients. This is where that would be disclosed to all parties, that you're making more than what's published on the settlement statement, which is typically the gross commission and co-broke per MLS.
Okay. Yeah, so some have like a bonus,
Right.
range of bonus. Is
Yeah.
that what it would be for, is like the bonus part?
Well, if the bonus is in MLS, if it's a bonus on commission, that shows up under the broker payment, on the settlement statement, so that would be that disclosure.
Okay.
The reason this is there is because some people get fees. There's really no place for it to show up because it's not going through escrow, it's coming directly to us.
Okay.
But all parties have to know whatever we're getting,
Okay.
full disclosure.
Every time we close a sale, like we get a phone call from ADT or someone saying, hey, your client, if he's buying a home, refer us and we'll give you a $200 gift card. If they sign up for ADT security system. I get those phone calls every transaction.
I do too, and I say I would not refer ADT to anyone. You suck. I'm a Simply Safe man. Take me off your list. Because Simply Safe is the coolest thing ever, and ADT is, they're the Auto Nation of, and anybody ever done business with Auto Nation? Holy Moses, they'll find emails you forgot you had, and you'll get 9 emails the next day. Yeah, I'm not a fan.
But that $200 gift card, we are not allowed to keep that.
You're not allowed to keep that. It would have to be, they'd have to give the gift card to the brokerage. You literally cannot make any money
Right.
in this business. The only way that you can do that, and this also must be disclosed, is say, well, I'll use my gal Sylvia for a change. For an example, she loves to use stagers, and if it's a listing, she will typically pay for it to be staged, and as part of her agreement, she gets reimbursed. Now, that does not have to be disclosed as compensation, but that does have to be disclosed that she now has a financial interest in the property, because when it closes, she's getting something other than a commission. So it's not additional compensation, but that still must be disclosed, because that's not compensation, that's, financial interest, which we all know has to be disclosed per R4 281101D and Article 4 of the Code of Ethics, I believe. Yeah. All right?
So you would, the stager would use this then?
Pardon me?
The stager would use this form?
No. No, a stager just simply disclosed I'm being reimbursed outside of escrow for the staging fee. It had to be in an email somewhere that everybody sees it.
Did they put the money amount on here, or?
Pardon me?
Do you put the money amount?
Yeah. How much and whom? All right. So class is only an hour today, by the way. Fortunate folks. Ordinary is till 4:30, but showed up was until 4, and so I actually made sure I only have an hour's worth of stuff, because Jermaine will tell you I tend to get long-winded, and sometimes I let you out late. All right. Additional clause addendum. Broker love addendum. You know why I love this addendum? Because these additional clauses are written by people like me and approved and rewritten by people like the lawyers for AAR, and it's fill in the blank, it's a checkbox, it's an initial, it's a signature, and you're off the hook. I see these clauses written all day, every day, which means there are people out there that don't know that this addendum exists. This is an awesome addendum. And these are not rare and unusual things. These are things that happen on a fairly regular basis. Backup contract, contingent upon cancellation of prior contract. Okay? I'm going to paraphrase. I'm an escrow. All's well. Things start getting a little squirrely. An agent calls and says, hey, I have a client that saw your house before they sold. They're really interested. How's your deal looking? And I go, I'm very concerned about it. We'll probably know within a week. Why don't you write me a backup? We have the backup. We get it accepted. This is what puts it in backup position. I have seen people have fully executed backups. They said, but verbally we agreed it's a backup. No. That means verbally agreed it's a backup. In writing, your poor seller sold the house to 2 people and is now in legal jeopardy. It's a beautiful clause. It basically says when deal 1 falls through, deal 2 automatically steps up, and deal 2 is not binding or obligatory and can be withdrawn anytime prior to it finding its place at first position.
If representing a buyer, listing agent says, hey, if you don't, if you're falling apart, if your transactions, your buyer's going to pull out, we have a backup. Can we request a copy of that backup?
Nope.
Can't.
It's a none. Besides, they have no power. If they're trying to talk you into backing out, then you assume they're BSing you. They have no power to cancel. Your buyer can look squirrely, your buyer can be hanging by a thread. As long as there's a thread, they still have the primary right to buy that property. Yeah.
So that backup offer, do they have to stay until the transaction closes, or they can?
No, this says they can withdraw at any time.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah, line 16.
Yeah. Buyer may cancel this backup anytime prior to seller's notice of cancellation of prior contract. So it literally just sits there, and the buyer gets tired of waiting. They can pull the plug anytime. If that other deal falls through and they get notice of cancellation, then it's a regular contract to earnest money, and the inspection period, all that kicks in and starts.
So you don't collect the earnest money on the backup offer until this contract is now enforced?
No. Yes.
Okay, got it.
You get that?
Yes.
I do.
You do collect?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
in other words,
I will open a backup escrow
Thank you.
if I think there's better than a 50-50 chance it's going to move forward. I've written backup offers that I knew there wasn't a chance in heck we were ever going to get that house, so why bother? The bottom line is your buyer needs to understand as soon as we get notice of that cancellation, that they're under contract, they must deposit earnest money, their inspection period starts, and their right to withdraw or cancel ends at that point. They can withdraw right up to that notice, but after that, it's a deal. All right.
they can always withdraw.
I don't like this next clause, but it's a necessary evil. And here's why. Signature of absent buyer, spouse, or co-buyer. Signing buyer shall within 5 days or how many days after acceptance of this contract obtain the signature of the absent buyer, spouse, or co-buyer on this contract, or deliver a disclaimer deed to escrow that eliminates the need for the absentee contract signature. And this is where this happens most commonly. And we have to respect and love these people. Soldiers in the field. Husband, the spouse is here, husband or wife's here buying the house on behalf. They've been communicating, they want the house, and he gets sent out on a mission, and he's going to be gone for 3 days. They want to get the deal done. That's when I see it most commonly done. You have to understand that clock, that 5 days, becomes very, very important, because it would be a condition subject to cure, Section 7A. Corporate relocation approval. Now, we have a little clause here. Your typical relo companies, which are, again, a necessary evil. Does everybody understand what a relo deal is? I work for Intel. I'm a junior executive, and they've decided to transfer me to Silicon Valley. I own a nice house in Chandler. They want me to get my butt to Silicon Valley next week. So they will, I'll put my house on the market with an agent, with me as the seller, and as soon as they get a buyer, they will step in and basically cash out the seller and step in and become the seller so the seller can go down the road. You have to agree to that. There's some weird terms. This is a nice little clause here. This basically says that there is relocation approval, but if you ever do a relo deal, get ready. There's usually about a 45-page, mind-blowing, make you want to hurt yourself addendum that you have to read, because there's some stuff in there that you won't like. Here's the deal with relos. They're kind of like REOs. They're totally weighted towards a relocation company, but if you're not willing to do it, your buyer can't get the house. I've had buyers go, do I really have to do this? Like, if you want the house. And here's the good side of that. I've only ever seen a relo company screw up a deal really bad and cause a deal to fall through once. Their motivation is to get the deal closed because they're putting out a big check to cash out the seller so they can buy their house in Silicon Valley, and they're typically being paid a referral fee off both sides. If someone lists a house with you and they say, I'm part of a relocation, if you list that house, get ready. You're going to get a call from the relo company that says, we want a referral fee, or you can't have this listing. And you're going to say, too late, I already do. And your seller's going to call and say, give them the money, because I need this relo package. Also, make sure anytime you have a client that's in a relo situation that they talk to a tax accountant or attorney. Relocations are very expensive, often 6 figures. They're a hell of a benefit. That's why the grocery clerk at Safeway does not get a relo package. It's usually an executive. That's taxable income. All that financial benefit is ordinary income. I saw a young couple. I sold their house here. It was a relo deal. They worked for the Forest Service. They got the best gig in America. They were transferred to Yosemite, which I guess if you're a Forest Service person is an awesome job. They were probably made $30,000 a year. I mean, they're really low paid. And they called me at the end of the year and said, John, we got a W-2 from the government for $72,000. That was a relo, and they had to pay taxes on it. So make sure your clients know that there is a financial downside to having someone cash you out, kick you down the road, pay for your mover, and spend a lot of money. And if you have someone that's looking for a relo situation, and movers and all that, there's a great relocation company locally that does individual deals, not all corporate deals. And I know the owner, so if you ever had that situation, call me.
What's the company name?
What's that?
What's the company name?
It's ComCap Relocation. All right. Non-refundable earnest money. I see non-refundable earnest money clauses written everywhere. Have you ever read this one? It is sweet, simple, and beautiful. It says, buyer's earnest money shall be non-refundable unless buyer is alleged to cancel pursuant to the due diligence section of the contract, the inspection period, the 10-day, 5 days no response. So they still have an inspection right to cancel. Okay? Excuse me. The contract is canceled pursuant to risk of loss provision or escrow fails to close due to seller's breach. That's what's so important. I see people all the time say earnest money is non-refundable. By the way, never say earnest money goes hard. It's like an earnest money boner. We don't have those, okay? Earnest money is non-refundable. Hard earnest money is just some silly reference we always use. And it must always say, except in the event of breach or non-performance by the seller. That's why you want to use this clause. Because I've had sellers say the earnest money was non-refundable. And the seller refused to close and made a demand for earnest money. Title company gave the earnest money back to the buyer, but it took 3 weeks to get it. This little clause covers you. So if you're dealing with non-refundable earnest money, use this beautiful clause, this beautiful document.
Should you include that on most contracts?
Pardon me?
Should you have this clause on most contracts?
Well, remember, typically this is being written by a buyer. So this is a buyer that really wants a house and is waiving non-refundable earnest money in the seller's face. But if you're representing a seller, you can actually require that clause to be signed by the buyer. Typically that's done on a counter. I still like this better than a counter. So on a counter I would see lines 28 to 30, 31 of additional clause addendum.
Okay.
Attached, incorporated, herein by reference.
So put it on your listings,
That's
and then if you have a buyer though who's dead set on getting this certain house, you can use it as a tool to kind of get in front of the house.
But they do need to understand that that's only covered in due diligence, which means they can't cancel if they don't like HOA documents.
Right.
They can't cancel if they don't like seller property disclosure
Right.
statement.
Yeah.
It's very binding.
And what about like also loan contingency? They can't cancel.
There is no one, it clearly states in there that, yeah, the loan contingency, it actually references,
So
no,
you really shouldn't go
non-refundable.
free.
And by the way, this is one of the signs of the real estate apocalypse, when buyers start aggressively making their earnest money non-refundable. They're taking a financial risk for the chance to win the deal. That ain't nothing. The signs of the real estate apocalypse are rapidly rising interest rates, check. Non-refundable earnest money, check. The next one would be line 32 to 36 are one of the 4 horses of the real estate apocalypse, okay? Waiver of appraisal. Buyer agrees to waive appraisal contingency pursuant to financing section of the contract, section 2 M and N. If the contract does not appraise, buyer is stuck. They either pay the difference or they lose earnest money, okay? No, excuse me, I take it back. They're agreeing up front to pay the difference. Now, they can still refuse to and lose earnest money, but I don't like this. By the way, the 4th horse of the real estate apocalypse is the stupidest thing we ever created in this business. It's called an escalation clause. Whatever someone else is paying, I'll pay more. I call it the what an idiot you are and your agent's horrible clause. I would never, ever. If a buyer wanted to buy a house with an escalation clause from me, and I did it in 2005, I said, I will not write one. You go find another agent, because you're gonna lose your ass. And this was in 2005. Guess who lost their ass first and worst? Those escalation clause and appraisal waiver idiots. All right.
Mr. Dyer, I don't understand, when would you use this? At what point in the progress of the contract?
This would be attached to the contract. This is your buyer going, hey, I want your house so bad, I'm getting a loan, and if the appraisal comes in low, I'll pay more.
But in the case of like the seller,
Like multiple offers.
they could initiate this.
The seller could create a counter that says, line 32 to 36 of the additional clause addendum are attached and incorporated herein by reference, and buyer agrees to waive appraisal. Just make it part of the counter.
What about the non-refundable earnest money? Would the seller ever initiate this?
That'd be the same thing. The seller can use it as a counter, a buyer can throw it out. These are basically 2 things. The buyer just going, I want your house so bad that I'm gonna do something that no one else is dumb enough to do.
And then, I have a quick question, I'm sorry. So let's say that you have addendums going, and this one, you have this, which I know you put addendum 1 up here. You can't
Okay.
see the little line because I'm not in
Right.
Does this have a little line with this, so let's say you have this one, let's say you have 3 of these that go back and forth. So you have 3 and then you have this one, does this become 4? Do you number these up top?
That would go 4 in Sky Slope, but that's not a numbered addendum because that is actually a separate clause to the contract. It's typically incorporated with the original document.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but if you were referring to, you could say,
Never mind.
I would
I
refer
already
to
know
it,
the answer.
I refer to it as the ACA,
Okay.
additional clause addendum.
What's the thoughts
But
on
then again, I gotta read so much stuff, I have an acronym for everything.
Additional clause addendum attached.
Okay.
I ain't got time for whole words.
Okay. Got it.
Oh. By the way, line 37 to 44, you're welcome. Because this is my clause. Several of my clauses have shown up in documentation. Remember, an all-cash sale in section 1, it clearly states on line 68, if this is an all-cash sale, section 2 does not apply, skip to section 3. The appraisal contingencies in section 2. A cash deal does not have an appraisal contingency. If they want one, that's how you put it in.
Okay.
And if I'm selling $1 million home, and especially up here in rural, Rio Verde area, where pricing houses is almost an act of mysticism, or you need some divine intervention to let you really know what that house is worth, I'm going to advise my buyer on a cash deal to still get an appraisal. All right. Survey, if you're doing a land deal, survey, and if you're doing a deal on a piece of land that they say it's an acre, and you're walking around going, where's the rest of it? You want to advise your buyer to get a survey, it's up to them, and this is what you would use. This is the exact language on our vacant land contract. Tax deferred exchange. If the seller is doing a tax deferred 1031 exchange, it means they use an exchange facilitator, which basically becomes a holder of trust of money between one deal and the next when they name their subsequent properties in a certain time frame. It's a neat thing offered by the government to avoid capital gains. It must be disclosed, and this is written perfectly. If you have a 1031 exchange and it's your first one, that's a broker hotline call so we can walk you through it and make sure that everything is being done correctly. Because the last thing you want to do is screw up and hang your seller out for income taxes on capital gains that they had an opportunity to get out of. They lowered capital gains, but they still exist. All right, water. Thank goodness we probably don't have a deal probably maybe 2 deals a year that this applies to, because it's Little Colorado River and the Gila River. So with the water rights, and there's disputes over that, and it's just a disclosure. Again, if you come across one of those where that's applied, call the broker. I can tell you what I know about this. Nothing, because I've never seen one.
Oh.
If you worked in Havasu, I'm pretty sure this may be an issue for you. Okay? Any questions? Everybody signs it, everybody dates it. Remember this thing, because like I said, I see 10 clauses written in section 8 for every time I see one of these used. Why not go with what they give you that's all nice and pretty and packaged, and all you gotta do is check the box? I'm a big fan though, you don't just check the box. Since we're doing DigiSign, put initial boxes there. Check the box, but put initial next to it. Because everybody knows I err on the side of paranoia and I'm a big fan of overkill.
John, you said on the domestic water well addendum, you don't see these often?
Pardon me?
You said the domestic water well addendum, you're not seeing these very often?
No. This water rights issue. This is about the areas of the state that there's litigation and their
Okay.
water rights are potentially at risk that has to be disclosed. Like I said, I haven't had to deal with it. I hope I never do. Because who the heck wants to be involved with a deal that has 2 states suing each other, federal litigation, and all that kind of crap that could potentially unplug their water down the road? Yeah, I hope I don't have to. I enjoy the fact I'm ignorant about it, because trust me, if we have one of those, guess who has to go read 1,000 pages of legal crap? Which I don't want to do. Any questions? Buyer contingency addendum. It's a 2-purpose addendum. I can tell you, in 2018, when we're listing one house for every 6 or 7 we're selling, there's not a lot of sellers who are going to accept a contingency upon the sale of a buyer's house. The other purpose of it is contingent upon successful close of a buyer's house, and that one's pretty much a given. Because if I'm selling my house in Peoria to buy a house in Scottsdale, and my down payment's coming from equity in that house, obviously I need a contingency in case that one does not close. I see people squeezing the time frames on those as well. But if this is what you do to protect your buyer, if they have a house to sell, we'll talk about that in a minute. Let's talk about contingent upon accepted offer for buyer's house. It shows the house is listed. I tend to want to attach a copy of the MLS on the property as contingent upon. Here's one thing. Here's one thing that people don't understand. Property located at. Look in here. It's not real clear that the property is on the market. Okay? So, if a seller is doing that, you want to make a condition of it that they prove the house is on the market. We had one where they did a contingency, the buyer never put their house on the market. And the seller subsequently lost earnest money on another house, which was that agent's mess up. But again, not a lot of people are going to sign, not a lot of sellers are going to accept this right now. The bottom part, contingent upon closing, that just means I got an escrow that protects them. Delivered seller within 3 days receiving cancellation if it's canceled. You got 3 days to notice, or if the deal closes, it proceeds and the contingency is removed.
You said not a lot of sellers will accept.
Pardon me?
You said not a lot of sellers will accept.
I'm sorry, at the top part, contingent upon, their house isn't sold, which means they're waiting for it to sold and close. The second one is contingent upon closing, which makes sense. There's a lot of people that even in this market, they're like, well, I don't want to start put my house on the market until I find what I want. I'm like, good, you got $1 million in the bank? They're like, no, I got $1 million equity. I go, well, then good luck. Because as a listing agent, I would laugh you right off my desk. The bottom one, though, successful closing, is very simple. It simply says that property has to close and it's got a time frame built into it. Never make those time frames necessarily simultaneous with the closing date. That means you're literally running up until the closing date with an if that may not close. That's unfair to a seller, and they're probably going to kick you right off the table. All right, this is the most common other addendum that I see. Okay, now look, following terms apply to either contingency agreed above within its time frame specified. Buyer shall deliver accepted offer documentations, including a copy of the purchase contract. So in this case, Pat, you're allowed to, you show me, prove it to me. Prove to me your house is on the market, prove to me your house is sold, prove to me that it's closing. I would say you have a right to a pre-audit to show that that 70 grand they're putting down, they actually have 70 grand equity at the bottom of their pre-audit.
I'm confused.
Buyer's market, which is coming, we're cycling no other way. These will become very, very common because the seller do whatever they have to sell their house. I would rather have a buyer's market than a seller's market any day.
I have a question for you on this, because this just kind of happened to me. I have a seller and a buyer put in a contingent. And so my seller wanted to make their earnest deposit non-refundable. So we did a counter to their offer, making their earnest deposit non-refundable. Doesn't that kind of just, which one stands at the end of the day then?
Well, remember, earnest money non-refundability and ability to cancel on a contingency are two different things. This gives them the ability to walk if it doesn't sell.
Exactly.
The non-refundable earnest
But
money
they don't lose their
is a
earnest
foregone
money.
conclusion. Two separate animals.
Okay, so they can walk if it doesn't close.
But they don't get their earnest money
But
back.
they don't get their, okay,
Correct.
good. I just wanted to make sure, because
Yeah.
that,
That's like when you have non-refundable earnest money. I've had people say, well, that removes their loan contingency. No, it doesn't. It removes their right to get their earnest money back if the contingency is not met.
right, okay.
All right, moving rapidly through our list. How are we doing time frame? About 35 minutes? Am I in 35 minutes yet?
You're at 5:52 now, so.
8 minutes.
I got 8 minutes left?
Yes.
See? Yeah. Oh, that's right, I started 2 minutes late. Domestic water well,
10 minutes.
addendum. If it has a well is a very big deal. It's also high liability because you're talking about, one of the most primal needs of a human being, liquid. You're also talking about one of the primary sources of environmental issues for the average American. Okay, dirty water's bad. Flint, Michigan, bad water. Unfortunately, part of New River had some bad water at one time. I've had agents say their buyers did not want to get a well inspection. That is insane. A buyer needs to have a well tested for output and quality, and they need to have a rating for how long the thing's gonna last, and this basically just goes through that, okay? When there's a well, the seller is also required to do a well seller property disclosure statement. I had someone that waived seller property disclosure statement, and they argued that the seller didn't have to do the property disclosure statement for the well because they waived spuds. Nope, this is spuds, DWWA SPDS, not SPDS. And you know what I always say this, any agent who puts a house on property on the market and requires a buyer to waive spuds hates their seller. Because spuds is to protect seller, not delivering one is a seller shooting himself right in the forehead. It's the stupidest thing someone can do. There's no excuse for it ever. And people say, well, section 4, I didn't deliver spuds, I don't have to disclose stuff. Guess where disclosure is? Section 5B. It's complete, the requirement, legal requirement to disclose everything material is actually in a separate contract, part of the contract than spuds. The spuds is just a nice little document that gives them the ability to do it and the ability to say, leave it blank and say, I don't know, you figure it out. Needless to say, this is the addendum that's almost a given on every contract. I would say 60% of houses that we do anymore have an HOA. I would say 90% of houses built in the last 20 years have an HOA. This is to be completed at the top by the seller, okay? By the seller. And there's actually a fillable version of this, okay? Filled out by the seller, disclosing all those potential costs. I want the seller to fill this out. I want to put it on the documents tab. So I get a contract with a completed HOA addendum. Okay? That also satisfies the disclosure obligation, because anything that costs money must be disclosed. This is how it's done. Make sure your seller knows the numbers and fills in the blanks. If your seller says things like, I'm pretty sure, tell them to stop thinking pretty sure and fill in the blank when they're absolutely certain. But do not let a purchase contract with an HOA involved ever get fully executed without a fully executed HOA addendum. Because your buyer may be agreeing to things that they don't really intend to agree to. This is a do it when you get the listing, and then the next part is all the boilerplate. This was all the stuff required by law of an HOA to provide to a buyer. Thank goodness our title companies do that, but remember, your title company's not responsible to deliver HOA stuff. Guess who is? Seller. It's a seller disclosure issue. Thank God title companies do it for us. Raise holy hell though. Get these things, get your HOA docs to your buyer, CC&Rs and HOA, as early in the game as possible. There are buyers that are seeing this stuff a week before closing. That's unfair, because if there's something in there that they can't live with, but their house is closing or their lease is running out and they already paid for the moving van, it's full of furniture, the genie's out of the bottle and the bottle's broken, and the buyer's gonna have to buy a house with things they don't like. This is something we as buyer reps need to go to war for early in the game. My advice is when you list a property, have your seller get the whole package together. They can get it from their HOA anytime. Don't put it on the documents tab though. Lesson learned by an agent I know. Documents tab is not made for something that fat. Or wait, or in the case of the Soviet Socialist Republic of Anthem, that fat. Anthem has 2 4-inch binders. That's their HOA stuff. When you buy a new home there, it's hilarious. You need a forklift to carry your damn paperwork out of there. Okay, so then we get to page 3, which is the buyer's acknowledgement and verification, restating who pays what. This should all be reflected clearly in MLS, and never let the buyer sign it unless you have it signed by the seller, okay? Because the buyer would be agreeing to stuff that the seller hasn't disclosed yet. And people say, just send me the HOA addendum and I'll send it back. No, HOA addendum comes to us completed by the seller before we deliver a contract. I've had agents say, well, I've never done it that way. You know, I'm sorry you've always done it wrong. Do it right because I want you to. It protects the seller. Because the seller has a legal obligation to disclose. And if there's something not disclosed because they didn't do the top part and sign it, that's also a backdoor for the buyer. So that would be it. Item 7 to disapproval. All right. Buyer signature, seller signature. It does require a countersign on the back. On-site wastewater treatment facility. Septic is typically what that's referring to. Septic has certain little special doodads to it. One of the doodads is septic is not real estate law. It's a Arizona Department of Environmental Quality law. So anytime you hear the word environmental, you should stand up a little taller. You should listen a little closer. You should pay a little bit more attention because you're talking about environmental law. And if you've ever heard any news stories on lawsuits, when the word environmental is involved in a lawsuit, that makes the news because there's lots and lots of money. It must be disclosed it's on a septic. The seller is required by law to have a certification done no more than 6 months before closing. Typically, they wait until escrow to do it. But sellers need to understand that is on them, and it's got nothing to do with us. It's referenced in our contract, it's referenced in our addendum, but it's ADEQ law.
It's not necessarily having a septic drain, it's just a certification.
Certification.
I thought
It
had to
they
be drained.
I
Has
thought
to be
they
inspected.
had to drain too.
No, because if it was pumped 2 weeks ago,
Right.
then they don't have to pump it again. They just
Okay.
have to certify that it's
That it
properly
has been
worked. Right.
pumped.
Now, most septic inspectors, because they make more money, go, we got to have a pump and dump before I certify. So they
Yeah.
they got you. They got some extortion power there because you can't do diddly without them. Just where this becomes a problem is people don't explain it to the sellers when they list their property. It's a law, it's a thing. Hopefully if they bought the property, I think it's been around for 11 years, if they bought the property, then they would have known that seller had to have it certified. And it's also in their best interest because you want to talk about a gnarly lawsuit.
Right.
The buyer's going to say the seller knew, and it ain't real complicated. I mean, it's basically that you flush and you make sure it goes where it's supposed to and it doesn't come back. The real mistake you can never make is not doing this addendum when a property is on septic. This is sacred, okay? If you have the addendum without the contract, I would be happier with you than if you had the contract without the addendum. Again, why? Environmental. Lawsuit, liability, poison, stink, death, poop in the wrong place. I mean, there's all sorts of downsides to septic issues.
But under the contract, the seller is only required by environmental law to pay up to 1% of the purchase price.
No. It's 1% purchase price to repair it.
Right. That's
But they're required to get the certification.
if they
Yeah,
don't
if
want
it needs repairs, then they're agreeing up front up to 1% or more. Which is why if you have a septic that's more than 27 years old, you might want to jack that up to more than 1%. Because something happened 1991, is that 27 years? Yeah. They changed septics, and the ones that are older than that tend to have a little bit more problems.
Okay.
Although I saw a septic certified a while back that's been in the ground since 1957.
But when you say you might want to jack that up, do you mean as when you're putting in an offer?
You're up to the buyer, yeah, you may, if you're really concerned, it's really, really old,
Okay.
or if it's on septic and the property's been vacant for 2 or 3 years, because that's one of the things that people don't realize about septic. Anytime you have moving water, it needs moving water to stay in good condition. When the market crashed and you had all these really high-end RAOs, there was lots of problems because they dried up. The lines dried, they started to crack, and
So in the situation where you're representing the buyer, and this is already, because I face this a lot out where we live, and this is already there, then and let's say it's in the documents tab. I can just disregard what they have in the documents tab because they have it at the 1%, and I can create a new one of these and up the amount.
Well, this is not a documents tab thing. This is a buyer addendum signed by the seller after the buyer. This should not be signed by the seller first. I know, that's silly.
So I'm just saying always disregard them.
Yeah, they're trying to say, pretend it's not there and write your own.
Yeah.
So the seller pays for the certification, and who certifies it? Is it the inspector?
Septic inspector.
Septic inspector.
Yeah, they're when they legally required that certification, septic inspector became a very lucrative job.
And that's
I know a
separate
guy
from
who
the
was
home
making,
inspector.
busting his tail with a septic company to make 150 grand gross, and while paying staff and trucks, and let's just say he's living pretty good now. Thank you to Arizona Department of Environmental Quality, because they're like the only hooker in town. They may be ugly, but you want them.
And they're separate from the home inspector, that's a completely different
It's
person.
all right, was that inappropriate?
No.
No, it's hilarious.
And I'm sorry, and that's separate from the home
Yeah.
inspector, correct?
Absolutely. But yeah, and that's because that's a seller requirement,
Right,
not a
and the
buyer.
seller actually
Okay.
is the one who gets that, who hires the person.
All right. Solar lease, solar loan assumption. Notice it's solar lease, solar loan assumption. If the solar is owned, it's covered in section 1G. It's an attachment to the property considered as part of the purchase price for no monetary value, although it obviously does add some value. The problem is the vast majority of them are leased or have a loan on them. And it can be, one second, it can be more difficult to qualify for a solar lease assumption than a mortgage in some cases. But like I said, I've literally written this stuff so many times. Part of my clause writing class was a solar lease clause because there wasn't an addendum. We've been begging and they finally wrote one. And it just absolutely covers everything. Seller's required to disclose everything about it. Seller's required to provide documentation, who they talk to, who the assumption is, and then it makes a contract contingent upon, because they may have their loan fully underwritten. But if the solar company won't approve them for that lease assumption, that's a non-deal, that's contingency, and the buyer has the right to walk. It ain't rocket science. It's just a full disclosure issue. Seller must get that stuff to them within 3 days. What does that mean to you if you're a listing agent?
Have it already ready.
You better have it ready before you get a contract, because I don't know about you guys.
Right.
Every time someone says something in 3 days, I'm late. 3 days is, in 2018, 3 days just passed. That's how life is. So, yeah, and it may require contacting a company who could really give a damn. And yeah, we'll get to it when we get to it. So make sure if you have seller has solar, you have everything available up front. I wouldn't put it on the documents tab, however, because it may have confidential proprietary information about the seller, little magic numbers like their social security number, and yeah, and that kind of stuff.
You're talking about
All
the
right.
documents tab on the MLS?
Pardon me?
You're talking about the documents tab
Yeah.
on the MLS? Okay.
Yeah.
That's where it's.
I would not put that. Now, if there's a solar lease assumption application, like for Solar City, that'd be a great thing to put on the documents tab.
Yeah, I've
But
seen
all
these
the
on
disclosure stuff on it, it can have some private information about the seller, which you don't want splattered all over MLS, because there's like 17 billion of us that have access to MLS now.
But this can be on the documents tab, this addendum, but not the actual, because this doesn't have any personal
Yeah,
information there.
that could be, I can put it out there if you want. And obviously, it should be a buyer signed first addendum, because if the seller fills out the addendum, the buyer would not have a chance to offer additional clauses, terms, which they may want to. They may have a reason to move the clock up faster or give the seller more time. Like they may find out from the seller that the solar company is in bankruptcy, which one was not too long ago. So people in bankruptcy aren't really in a hurry to provide stuff. So you would need more time for that. You wouldn't be able to do that on behalf of the buyer. But make sure you use it. If there's solar, it's leased, it's assumption first. Find out if it's leased or the loan must be assumed. If so, use the addendum. If not, don't. I've seen one of these, and in additional terms it said solar owned by the seller, which is another way of saying I had no reason to put this form in here, but I did anyway. Okay?
So when it's owned, that's in section, did you say G? 1G?
1G. 1G is where you have fixtures and personal property. And a solar is clearly a fixture because it's an attachment.
And then the document that's only has a 3-day timer on it that they need to get.
That's
for
all
recycling.
information on the solar.
It's just all the information
Yeah.
from the solar company.
It's a
and from the
contract if it has
process.
to be assumed, disclosures if they have that, yeah. Terms of the lease, terms of the loan assumption.
Okay.
And I have to say, I've never done a deal with them personally, but as a broker, I love Solar City because they seem to be the one solar company that crossed their mind up front that people might actually sell the houses after the solar get on. Some of the other ones, it's like none of their documentation really paid attention to the fact that these people might want to move. And I've seen one where they had to pull the solar off. Solar company would not play, and they had to pay $7,000 to pull the solar off because
What about like if someone has to have their roof repaired? and they have solar, doesn't that, so if you're representing a buyer and the buyer doesn't want the solar, but they wanna buy the house, and the roof is old, or even if they want the solar, but the roof is old, or wouldn't that cost the buyer more? I mean, isn't that like a?
Yes, yeah, you have, and I used to build homes, luxury homes. Penetration equals problem. Okay, anytime you have a roof penetration, you know, like your little vent fan, or your air conditioner, anything like that is a potential problem. Solar has a substantial number of big bolts into the roof, so it has a higher risk of other things, which is why if you have a solar, any deal you have with a solar, you don't just want the solar to be certified, whatever, assumed, but you want a roofer to get up and check that the solar has not damaged the roof. The way they do them now, they're doing a pretty good job. The technology in solar has gone crazy, but the older ones, they tended to have problems. And one of the things that you would see back in the 80s is little rust lines on the shingles because they were using non-stainless steel bolts to penetrate a roof. It got wet, and eventually those bolts are going to rot and they drip. I haven't heard about those problems lately, but definitely anytime there's a solar on a roof and there's a bunch of holes punched in the roof, I would want a roofer to get up there and give it the thumbs up above and beyond a home inspector. Because here's what a home inspector is going to tell you. I don't know, I don't care, not my problem.
Right.
I don't do solar. All right, everybody.
Thank
Whew.
you.
I told you I was going to run through those. I will be doing the clause class, clause writing class. I think I'm going to just do an hour and a half version as part of this series. So just watch the workshop Wednesdays, and then I'll get more in depth into clause writing. Okay? Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.
You too.
Every time I get one of those shitty Benzers, I say, you know what, you should have